The topic is getting your capital construction project started. We have Michael Shillali presenting today, excuse me. Michael has been an architect for over 25 years and is LEED accredited since 2004. Michael has been a keynote speaker at various engineering, design, and planning societies and teaches a sustainable design class at Rockland Community College. He lectures often on designing more effective educational environments. He is the chairman of the Green Council for the Rockland Business Association. His company, founded in 1991, is committed to protecting and preserving the environment through their design work and has won many design awards. Last year, the New York State Society of Professional Engineers recognized Michael as Citizen of the Year for his design work and for advocating sustainable design. Before I turn everything over to Mike, just one point of order. In order to ask questions, all you have to do on your end is hit the raise hand button on your screen. That will notify me you have a question. I'll then break into to the presentation and put you through to Mike. Now, if you have not put in your audio pin into your phone, please do that now. It won't disrupt anything on your end. That is the only way for you to be able to ask questions if that pin has been entered. That pin is located on the right-hand side of the screen in a pane titled Audio. And with that out of the way, Mike, I'll turn it right over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I hope everyone's having a good afternoon and you didn't eat too much for lunch, so you're not going to doze off. We'll keep it interesting and moving. I'm proud to be selected to deliver this program to you. For over 20 years, we've been helping school districts deliver successful capital projects, and I had one contractor describe it this way to me. Capital projects are always challenging endeavors. He likened it to building an automobile where they build hundreds of them every day coming off the assembly lot, and you drive one of those automobiles away and invariably the door will rattle, the windows will leak a bit, and you'll have a problem with the air conditioning or some other system. Now, buildings and capital projects are all unique. They're all prototypes and beta versions. It's really the first time we're doing that particular kind of project in that particular location. And what we're going to try to do this afternoon is give you an overview of how to smooth out some of those challenges, what to look for, and how to get your capital project construction started. So just an overview of what we're going to chat about this afternoon. We'll have a little getting started. I'll give you some background on why we believe that it's important to follow some of these guidelines in your capital project. We'll help you assemble a quality team and talk to you about determining your scope of work, which isn't always in your control. There are other factors that determine what will be the scope of your project. We'll get you the information you need to prepare for your vote in your referendum. After you get approval, there's a phase called design and documentation, which we feel is one of the most important phases in the project. I know everyone has a love-hate relationship with the State Education Department, and we'll talk to you about how to deal with them in a successful way. Maybe it's just one of those adjectives, but certainly SED is a critical piece here. We'll talk about the bidding and construction phases, which are the exciting parts for us. Sometimes they're anxiety-producing for our clients, and we try to help them smooth out that process. And then toward the end, we'll give you some creative financing ideas, which comes right from a program we delivered to New York State school boards in Buffalo last year. So if you were there, you got some of that information. If not, we'll get it to you this afternoon. And then we'll talk a bit about the pitfalls and the hurdles and what to look out for. But just a bit of background, I'm sure everyone's dealing with, like our clients are, the struggling budgets in our post 2% cap world. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think there's still some turmoil. But everyone is considering staff reductions or have actually had some significant layoffs, program reductions, reduction and elimination of their capital and reserve accounts. We have a few clients dealing with closings and consolidations. And everyone is thinking about deferring their maintenance and their capital projects. And what we're going to try to show is the importance of maintaining and upgrading your facilities. A recent Department of Energy study looked at school buildings across the country and told us the average school building is 42 years old, and I think here in New York we have some older averages, I bet, with 75% of them being built before 1970. And one interesting statistic out of that study is that the majority of our nation's schools, somewhere over 51%, have inefficient mechanical, electrical systems, leaky roofs, inadequate window and security systems. Now, I'm sure many of your districts are dealing with some of those same, if not all of those issues. And coincidentally, those are the items that we can help finance through some of those creative strategies like an energy performance contract, which we'll talk about a little later in the webinar. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with Section 155.1, which requires the comprehensive long-range plan and your 5-year plan, which are also part of your building condition surveys every 5 years. And we'll go into a little bit of that and how that will help inform what some of your scope of work will ultimately be. But I always like to start out with a quote from one of my favorite guys, Winston Churchill, who said that first we shape our environments and thereafter our environments shape us. You know, the other reason to keep our buildings high performing and healthy is that we spend over 90% of our time indoors, and healthy buildings are critical to so many aspects of what we try to do, especially in school environments. The EPA and the U.S. Green Building Council had done a study recently about the impacts of just indoor air quality in healthy buildings and how it is critical to the health, comfort, and actually the ability to perform. And in school environments, there's also significant issues with asthma. I think they say 1 out of every 10 school children has asthma. Is directly related to poor indoor and outdoor air quality from some of the studies I've seen, with over 11 million school days missed each year due to asthma. And there's studies out there that show that can be improved with a better indoor air quality and a higher performing building. But it also relates to academic performance. There are studies out there demonstrating the relationship between not only the indoor air quality, but the quality of the indoor environment with some daylighting and higher performing buildings, that it increases productivity, improves the ability to perform tasks. There's a study out there done by the Hirshong-Mahone group, which I can get you the link to, that shows in classroom environments test scores can go up 20% and other performance improvements in buildings that are simply daylit as opposed to buildings that are artificially lit. So there's no question that a quality environment, I think, can help improve some of the things that are challenging our school districts. And without question as well, cost savings are a big driver in higher performing buildings and why we do a lot of the work that we do. Decrease in absenteeism has been shown in better quality buildings and higher performing buildings, as well as the ability to defer maintenance and replacement costs. So you can see not just the EPA, but the SED, NYSERDA, U.S. Green Building Council, all of these organizations believe that effective schools are not just the result of quality teachers and concerned parents, but also quality and high-performing environments. So this is really the why. I just wanted to get through this rather quickly to talk about the why these capital projects and these infrastructure upgrades are critical. As you see, we can extend the life of materials and systems pretty significantly, and also reduce maintenance and upgrade costs. That's something that drives a lot of the work that we do. Reducing operating costs is an easy thing to do. We can go into a district most times and reduce your energy costs, sometimes 20 to 30%, and that is what funds a lot of our energy performance work. And this statistic is pretty staggering. Almost $8 billion annually is spent throughout the country just on energy, more than textbooks and computers combined. We had one school building that was identical to another elementary school. They were both 87,000 square feet. We had put new roofs on them both and boiler upgrades in both buildings. And one was spending twice the fuel as the other building. And once we started benchmarking it, we figured it out, and it really had to do with that the maintenance staff in one building was much better at setting the boilers back at night, closing the windows, and at the other building, the facilities director told us he didn't have that concerned a staff. And we can fix some of those things as well with a building management system and an energy management system, which we are doing in that particular building. But it just goes to show you that even with high-performing systems and equipment, you need to have a staff or concerned people managing those buildings well. And we spend 15% of our lives in learning environments. We do a lot of early childhood work, child care centers and things, and Anita Olds is sort of the guru of early childhood design. And she tells us that today's child spends an average of 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, essentially within the 4 walls of one room. And that's from 3 months to 5 years old, about 12,500 hours. The same amount of time our children spend from kindergarten through the 12th grade. So that's a total of about 25,000 hours inside educational environments, 15% of our lives. And so it's critical to maintain and keep those indoor environments high performing and of good quality. But let's get right into how to get started on your capital project. One of the first things you'll have to do is to assemble your team, which will be made up of obviously your Board of Education, and most of our clients set up a facilities committee made up of several board members, some district staff, as well as consultants, your architects and engineers. Selecting that part of the team will give you some advice on. Certainly your parent-teacher associations are going to be critical to help gain input for your capital project, what their needs are, at least from their point of view, and even some community groups we found are important to gain input on, especially when you're trying to pass a referendum. Your district facilities committee, their responsibility will be to study the recommendations and advice of all those different parties and make recommendations to the Board of Education. You'll look at facilities assessments. Your building condition survey, that's what the BCS stands for, is one of the primary documents that you'll start with, and we'll get into some of the nuances there. And then you'll walk the buildings. We find seeing the buildings up close and personal with your facilities committee is critical. We had one client take our board out on a hot, humid summer night, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. That sort of cut the walkthrough rather short. But certainly in another instance, we had a district superintendent want to come up onto a roof that we were investigating that had some ice patches and ice damming going on, and the business official advised us not to let our super up on the roof for fear of losing our leader in that case, and he had leather bottom shoes and wasn't really prepared. But try to find a good time to walk the buildings when it's comfortable and really look at the condition of your interiors, your exteriors, your fields, and that goes a long way to informing what your project will encompass. To select architects, engineers, and construction managers, it's always recommended to put out a request for proposals with those kinds of consultants. It's not a bid, so you don't have to accept the lowest responsible bidder. You can use what's called a quality-based selection process, I guess similar to how you would select your attorney or your accountant. And here in New York State, there's a great website for that called nysqbs.org, and they'll even give you a sample RFP, talk to you about what the process should be, and how to select what would be the best consultants for your district and for the project that you envision. Once you have that team assembled, determining your scope of work is also a challenging endeavor at times. You'll rely on those facility assessments that we had talked about earlier. The program needs that you get from your staff and your teachers, the community needs that you may have begin to assemble, and then you start prioritizing those and setting up some budgets. When we did our last building condition survey in 2010 for one district, we found over $10 million worth of capital needs there, and it's certainly quite a lot for districts in these times to try to finance. And it was important to try to find ways to perhaps defer some of that work and try to make some of the materials and systems last longer so they don't have to be upgraded or replaced sooner, and to find ways to pay for those particular projects. We decided there to start with an energy performance contract, which we'll talk about a little later, because that kind of work can fund quite a lot of capital improvements. The only ones that process can pay for, however, are capital improvements that save energy, and not all of them will. So you want to try to get as many improvements underneath an energy performance contract initially, and then use any Excel money you may have or other sources of dollars to finance the things that can't be financed in more creative ways. So that's something we could chat about a little later as well. Your facilities assessments, as I said, are made up initially of your building condition surveys, your rescues. Last one was in 2010. You have to be careful there because anything that's a health or safety item in those BCS surveys and its life expectancy is under 5 years, has to not only have a budget attached to it, but if you're doing any work in a particular building that has one of those health safety items that has a life expectancy of under 5 years, you will have to include that in the capital project for that building. So that's a caution that we always have to our clients, to make sure when they're doing their rescue surveys to have a dialogue with your consultants and facilities director and make sure that the items that are there are district priorities. For us to determine the life expectancy of an item, it's sort of like determining the life expectancy of a human being. I mean, it's a guess, it's an educated guess, and certainly whether something lasts 4 or 5 years or 6 or 7 years, again, judgments can be made in that area so that a district's not caught spending money on things that's not really one of their high priority items. You'll have your 5-year plans that have to get submitted with every capital project, and you would have done those as part of your rescue survey as well. Your facilities committee addresses some needs. You have district needs that come from others involved, and you have another item called your existing building evaluation, which anytime you submit a building application to SED, you have to do this existing building evaluation, Form FPEB. And there's over 50 items that we have to look at and certify whether it's compliant or non-compliant. And these items are different than what's on the rescue and the building condition surveys, and oftentimes they add costs to a project because those nonconformances have to be corrected as part of any work in a particular building. So your scope of work is put together where we begin to document the district priorities, and then we can start determining preliminary budgets. And that's made up of the hard costs, which are the actual construction costs, and what we call soft costs, or what SED calls incidentals, which are your fees, your legal fees, your consultants' fees, any testing that has to happen. Interestingly, SED considers site work to be an incidental. Most of the time we consider that a hard construction cost. But site work is also included in the soft or incidental costs submitted to SED, and they try to limit those to about 22% of the budget. So you want to analyze that and make sure you're all within what you think is going to pass mustered in your community, and you present that to the Board of Education and the community. We recommend an iterative process, not just a linear one, so that you're going to encourage feedback and try to show that you're listening to your teachers, to your parents, to your community, and you're adjusting your scope of work based on those particular needs. We had one project which I'll tell you about in the pre-referendum issue, where we're doing some artificial turf fields, and the referendum and the bond council had written the resolution so tightly that we couldn't convert the artificial turf to a natural turf field in our process. And it turned out the community was not in support of artificial turf. This was some years ago when the crumb rubber infill on those artificial turf fields were a bit suspect, and they had some environmental issues. I think now SET actually put a moratorium on that for a while, but they've lifted that, and it's been shown that they're not as hazardous as they thought, and there's other infill material now, but that resolution was written so tightly that it didn't give us any flexibility in the pre-referendum phase. And ultimately that did not pass because of that community opposition. So reaching out to the community and getting their feedback is critical. You will need a Board of Education action before the vote, and you'll have to do your seeker analysis, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. You'll have to do that before the vote. And for most of your infrastructure projects, it would be a Type 2, a repair or upgrade is a Type 2 action. Actions under seeker are designated as Type 1, Type 2, and unlisted actions. Type 1 actions are the ones that may have some environmental significance, but most of your actions would be Type 2. There's a link there where you can read about the seeker process. And you'll have your board do a negative declaration, which is actually a positive thing, that there will be no environmental impact under seeker for your project. And certainly your consultants can help you put that together. As I said before, I think it's important to have some dialogues with your bond counsel, make sure that the resolution and what you're putting out to the community is clear, but give yourselves some flexibility to change your scope of work. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how your scope of work may have to change as you move further down the process. The pre-referendum work is usually only a small part of the design and documentation phase. It's enough to get you some preliminary budgets where you know what's happening, but there always are issues that come up, whether it's identification of hazardous materials, or as the design progresses, some code issues or the EEB issues that may cause your scope to change a bit, or community issues at times. And so do the outreach, issue surveys, create a task force, and have enough meetings so that when you put this referendum out there, you can be assured of some success. And you all know, certainly better than I do, how to get the word out to your communities and try to gain that community support. But that's critical. And once you get your vote approved, the design, development, and construction documentation phase, as I said earlier, is a critical piece. It's where we complete the documentation to really further define the scope of work, and that's critical to a successful project. Oftentimes, we'll see contractors try to substitute materials, lower quality materials or systems, and without clearly defining whether that door is going to have a full piano hinge or a 5-knuckle hinge, and whether it's a fiberglass door or a painted steel door. All of that significantly affects your project cost and certainly can lead to issues. And we find with complete documentation, we can prevent a lot of that from happening. As I said before, your pre-referendum work is really only about, we consider about 50% of the schematic design, so that you will have quite a lot of development in your design, and when you produce the final bidding documents or construction documents, you should expect some revisions in your scope and in your costs. Now, our budgets are fixed. We know that. We put it out for a particular budget. So if there is going to be a change in scope, something else has to change as well. And I always like to talk a little bit about cost control. And one of the questions I always get from people is, how do we keep a project under budget and prevent cost overruns? And I think Matt said if you guys have any questions, certainly submit them. But I'm sure all of you and many of our clients, they demand, and they need cost-controlled projects. And we found how to deliver them. We've successfully completed millions of dollars of capital improvements on time and under budget, and have some unique strategies to achieve those goals. One of the strategies we use is using alternates and unit prices, where we'll design different alternative solutions depending upon what we find when we start doing our renovation project. In one instance, this strategy saved over $200,000 for a client that we were able to reuse the roof insulation that was in good condition. We had done some test cuts and found that while the roof was leaking in many areas and needed replacement, a good chunk of the insulation throughout the roof was pretty dry. And rather than ripping off the entire roof and the insulation down to the structural deck, which is often the case, we designed an alternate and got alternate prices to leave that insulation in place. And you have to also build in some contingencies for partial removal and replacement of roof insulation. We just found on a project we're doing presently that this morning we got a call that there's some wet insulation and had to run up there and identify the quantity of it, and are replacing, it's about 200 square feet of it, not a large amount, but there's costs involved with that, especially if the contractors are assuming that that insulation is staying in place. But those things can be managed well. Some other strategies like detailing your documentation very comprehensively and doing some detailed cost estimating can help control your costs. It prevents having gray areas during the bidding process. We also budget for contingencies. And cost estimating is, we love doing it. We consider it as much an art as a science. But it's important to remember that architects and engineers really have no control over construction costs, and that sometimes market conditions, material costs, even time of year factors can impact the cost significantly. So I always show this triangle to kind of give people an understanding of it, that the cost of any particular item or any particular project is made up of three parts. It's that cost, it's the quality of that product or that whole scope of work, and how much, or the scope of it. So if you're replacing 100 doors and your budget is X amount of dollars, and you're finding that the costs are coming in high, you can either reduce the quality of those doors, which oftentimes is not a good idea, especially in schools and some of the other projects that we do. Doors and door hardware are some of the costliest items to maintain and upgrade, and we find spending extra dollars there makes a lot of sense. So the only other alternative would be to change the scope, to not replace 100 doors, or perhaps only do 80 or 90 in order to maintain that fixed cost. So if you're going to change any one of these items, the cost, the quality, or the scope, something else has to change to keep that budget there. And that's always a challenge, but if you're aware of it, you can manage that well and be successful with your projects. One of the other questions I'm always asked is the scope of work. Should we spread out that work over many different buildings, or should we try to focus on one building and do as much as we can in one particular building? And certainly the tendency there for districts is to spread the work out for a number of reasons. We try to group work by trade or contractor. So we would group roofing work together on a number of different buildings, or flooring work. And you get some benefits there in terms of economies of scale, bidding out a larger project and reducing the costs. There's a benefit as well doing it that way, that a number of your schools are getting some significant dollars, and you can get some broader community support if all your elementary schools are getting a certain amount of money, and the communities and the neighborhoods around there are happy that their schools are being improved. But some of the caveats are to be careful about those EEBs, because each building you do work in has to have an EEB done, and that can drive some improvements in each building. And as I said before, your building condition surveys can also require you to include some items in your scope of work that were health and safety items with a life expectancy under 5 years. So it's certainly costlier to administer and process a project that's spread out over a number of buildings rather than one or two. But there are benefits to both of that, both approaches, really. When we do energy performance contracts, which we'll talk about a little later, it usually encompasses all the buildings, because they all usually can benefit from an energy management system, sort of like what I was chatting about with those two sister elementary schools, that one was using twice the fuel each year. And lighting improvements and computer load management improvements typically can apply to every building. But in some of our EPC projects, we've actually had to remove buildings from the project because of the cost of some of those EEB or BCS items outweighed the benefits to the project. And in one instance, one of the buildings, a demonstration building, wasn't even legalized yet as far as SED is concerned. So it's something to be cautious about when you put your project together, that all your ducks are in a row, and it's going to be something that we can get approved through SED, which brings us to this next slide. Your authority having jurisdiction, SED is your building department, and as such, they issue you a building permit and a certificate of occupancy. When that building permit is required, there are items that do not require a building permit, and they list them on their website in their guidelines, whether if it's just site work, playgrounds, or bleachers. Even if you do a project like grandstands or bleachers, we still recommend, if you're not going to get a permit, have your architect or engineer do some special inspections on those projects. You're dealing with steel and concrete work, and you're dealing with sometimes thousands of people sitting on these structures, and I would not want to not have a set of eyes looking over the way that concrete is set into the ground or the way that steel is assembled when you hire your bleacher company. But there are inspections that have to get made in every project, and it's important to note that SED does not come down and make those inspections. That's done by your architects or engineers. They are your building inspectors as well as your consultants. And the districts are required to provide supervision of the construction, which is typically not provided by your architects or engineer. And SED has a very good newsletter on this particular issue. Many districts use a clerk of the works or a construction manager, a CM, to provide the district-required supervision, just to have that extra set of eyes there, usually on smaller projects under $1 million. A district can do it with their own facilities people. But as the projects get larger and more complex, most districts bring on a third-party construction manager. Or they ask their architects or engineers to provide additional site inspections and supervision. SED is sometimes a difficult group to work with. As building departments go, they have the longest turnaround time for building permits. We do work in New York City as well, which is a difficult place to do work, and we can get permits there sometimes much quicker even than we can out of New York State SED. I think the present waiting time is about 12 to 16 weeks for a building permit, so you really need to budget that into your schedule. And the quality of the documentation submitted to SED will affect the time frame of your review process. They want to see comprehensive documentation. Here's a listing of some of the things that they will require. SED asks that you go to SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, every time you do a project. Make sure your buildings are not historically significant. For most projects, it's really just a ministerial event. One particular project, we had a building that was quite old that SED felt had some historical significance. We were replacing some windows in this project, and they were not happy with the window and the historical look of it. It was more contemporary looking, even though it was a double hung. Didn't have the divided lights and so forth. You can negotiate with them. We worked with them explaining that this was really more of a mechanical building for a new school that didn't have students in it, so it really just housed mechanical equipment, and we got them to relax some of their issues. But they can cost you some dollars if they're asking you to maintain a building in a particular way. As we said before, you need to do your existing building evaluations, and those are critical to provide. Your contract documents have to be complete. They prefer more comprehensive documentation and go over it more thoroughly than any building department we've ever worked with. They have architects and engineers that are very knowledgeable, and they look very closely at the contract documents, and we consider them partners. We want quality documentation as well. As I said earlier, it helps assure that you get a smooth process and that you minimize your change orders during construction. The building permit application is there online. You can see samples. There's checklists involved that tell you what to submit. You'll have to submit your 5-year plan, so they're going to know if you have any health safety items in your building condition surveys that they'll say you have to include in your scope of work. Sometimes we can have those items or the EEB items, whether it's some extra exit lights or maybe the glass in some doors are not laminated. You can have your district personnel do that work and not have it as part of your construction project. If you're just doing a roof project, usually you don't want your roofers coming into your building, adding some exit lights or replacing some glass and doors and things like that. So rather than put it into the construction project, you can tell SED that you're going to do it with your own forces, but they want to make sure that that work gets done certainly before they'll issue a certificate of occupancy on the project. So let's talk a little bit about emergency projects. They do happen. SED does not like to see too many emergency projects get submitted. Sometimes districts use this tool as a way to expedite the SED process. So they issued some edicts in the past few years saying, really they're going to look much more closely at what you consider an emergency project. It's an item that must require immediate corrective action that cannot wait. There are some benefits to it that you don't have to advertise for bids, and you may not need to get multiple proposals. They still ask you to do drawings and specifications for their review. You will get an expedited review, which helps, and it's going to be managed just like any other SED project. We've had 2 emergency projects in the last 5 years or so. One was a roof that when we looked at it in the spring, we thought we can get another season out of it. It was too late to get the documentation up to SED, bid it out, and have the roofing work done over the summer, which we prefer to do. You never want to do roofing, especially hot tar roofing, hot asphalt roofing, when there's students in the building. So we thought we can get another year out of it. Come the fall, we realized the rubber EPDM roof had deteriorated so much we couldn't even patch it. And so we did an emergency replacement of that roof, and SED was cooperative there. We had done another emergency project when we lost an electrical service one summer. Fortunately, we lost that electrical service over the summer. It took about 3 weeks to get it back online, and SED was very helpful in working with us. We just went to one of the electrical contractors who was on another project in that same district, got some pricing from them, and were able to get that service reinstalled. That's one of the things that we have a creative financing solution, so we'll go over that in a little more detail toward the end of the webinar. But we should also talk about hazardous materials. That's sometimes scary to our clients when you talk about asbestos or PCBs. Even lead paint now is getting to be an issue in a lot of restoration and renovation projects. We really deal with it just like any other construction component, that, you know, if you get the right consultants on it, identify where the issues could be. You all have your Asbestos Hazardous Emergency Response Act reports since 1986 filed on file at the school, and you have to update them every 3 years. But we always recommend an environmental assessment before you do a project, just to determine, you know, if there's going to be any hazardous materials as part of that project. And we've seen projects where, you know, you get started and you've gotten clean bill of health from the consultants, and you find asbestos somewhere where it wasn't expected. We've actually found asbestos in ceramic tile, which was kind of odd. It wasn't really suspected by anyone, but they tested it anyway. And there's actually roofing cements out there now that you can buy that do contain asbestos. So we're very cautious about what gets used on our projects, and you should be as well, as what gets used to patch or repair your roofs and other things. But you know, if you follow the protocols, it's really shouldn't be something that should give you too much trouble during your construction project. State building aid is an interesting topic for us. There's experts out there who know far much more about building aid than I do, and but as you know, reconstructions, additions, and new buildings get building aid payable over 15, 20, or 30 years respectively, and that's a bit of a change. They used to give you building aid in the following year of your project, but now it's amortized over those time periods. Your project has to be over $10,000 to be eligible, and each district has their own aid ratios, as you know, and that comes into play in some of the strategies down the road, so we'll talk about that. There is a $100,000 exception to that amortization, that if you have a project under $100,000, you will get your building aid in the following year after completion of your project. Now, you can only do that once each year. You can't do 10 $100,000 projects. I asked that question to SED in one particular year, but you can do that once a year, and if you're doing an electrical service upgrade or something like that, it makes some sense to do that. Creative financing is something that I'm sure everyone is interested in. We were fortunate to have a program approved by school boards last fall, where we showed 6 different strategies to creatively finance your projects and really bring some additional resources to districts that are struggling, quite frankly, as many of you are. And the EPC is the Energy Performance Contract, which I had chatted about earlier. I'm sure most of you have spent your Excel dollars. Some districts have been very creative about how they did that, and we want to show you that just in case you have some Excel dollars left. Some of our clients have been successful securing grants, either for the full amount of projects or partially funding projects. We've had some clients be successful with FEMA funding, and we'll talk about how you could possibly access some of that money. And I'm sure some of you are leasing your bleachers, or in some cases we're leasing entire classrooms, and that strategy works well, especially if you're a BOCES district. And then we have a primary electric strategy that really pays for itself over 10 or 12 years, and that's a strategy that we were trying to get SED to accept as part of an energy performance contract. It saves districts money, doesn't save them energy, so you really have to do that separately. But we'll talk about all of these creative financing strategies. Let's start with the energy saving performance contract. Really, these are no cost to the taxpayers. The construction is paid for totally out of the energy savings. We have one client that spends over $2.6 million a year in utility bills, and they're saving over $400,000 each year by this energy saving performance contract, and it's going to fund over a $7.5 million project. You don't need a referendum. One of the other benefits to an energy saving performance contract, it's really just a Board of Education resolution. You do get building aid on it, which is kind of an interesting thing depending on your aid ratio. It's not added to the calculation, which I'll show you a sample calculation in a minute. But the building aid is really just additional dollars to help your bottom line over the life of the building aid. So not all of the work under an EPC is aidable, but much of it is. And you green your buildings, which, as we said earlier, can help you improve test scores, productivity, and certainly reduce absenteeism for both your teachers and your students. There are some cautions with EPCs. They are like any other construction project, and they'll have all the risks and responsibilities of construction projects. There are some consultants out there and energy service companies out there that tell you, oh, you won't see any change orders on an EPC, that you don't really need an architect. And, you know, we caution our clients that that's not quite true, that EPCs are design-build contracts, and we can go into them in more detail if you like, but I just want to give you some of the cautions and overview of what's involved there. District priorities need to be made very clear. We had one client that was pursuing an EPC solely to finance a new roof that they needed. This roof was badly leaking. And although roofs can be included in an energy performance contract, because they can save energy if you add some insulation, they usually don't have very quick paybacks because they're very expensive based on how much energy they save. And SED requires that the average payback for all of your energy conservation measures has to be around 18 years. In the past, some energy performance contracts had, 20, 30, and sometimes even 40-year paybacks, and you were the life expectancy of the equipment or the systems certainly didn't even last that long. So you were still paying for things that you've had to replace once or twice. So they stopped that, and they've mandated that anything you do has to average out to 18 years. And so when we put out an RFP for the EPC, a number of the energy service companies came back and did not include the new roof that this one district wanted, which was, I found that hard to believe. But many of these ESCOs, which are energy service companies, that are the companies that you use to perform your energy savings performance contract, they have what they like to do, whether it's building controls or energy management systems, or some of them actually make lamps and ballasts, and so that's the kind of work they like to do, and they may not always do what's most important to your district. And the construction quality sometimes is a little more difficult to control on an EPC. Remember, as a design-build contract, you're really just contracting with one entity, the energy service company. We advise our districts to make sure that energy service company hires an architect or engineer of their choosing, and you can do that by putting it into your RFP. So that's a good strategy to try to make sure you have someone on the district side making sure things are being built the way they're supposed to. And certainly measurement and verification is important to assure the savings. Your energy savings are guaranteed by these energy service companies. So that guarantee has a lot of caveats in it, and measuring that and verifying that is critical if you intend to hold their feet to the fire on the energy savings. We can spend a whole session on that, but I just wanted to show you a sample of one of the projects and the different items that were included in this particular energy savings contract. And you'll see the annual cost savings in the first column there after the description of the item. So at the bottom, we're saving over $440,000 each year. And then the total cost is the actual implementation of that construction process or that energy conservation measure. So item FIM 12 is a roof replacement. It's over a $3 million roof, and if you see, it's over 600 years to pay for itself. But many of the other items have very quick paybacks, 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, and it's those quicker payback items that help finance some of the longer payback items, like the boilers. We're getting 2 new boilers in this project as well. And interestingly enough, I'll point out the photovoltaics have long payback items, long payback times, because this one has 108 years. Because a lot of the incentives for school districts are not the same as for private entities. There's federal tax credits and depreciation that the districts can't take advantage of, and depending on the cost of installing that particular PV array, they can have some pretty long payback times. We are installing a very interesting code generation unit, which here's a little schematic of it, where we're going to generate our own electricity. And there's some excess heat. That's why it's called code generation, or combined heat and power generation. If you have a pool facility, or if you have a high demand over the summer, these kinds of things can pay for themselves. And not only will they save energy, as you see, but they'll help reduce your demand load, which down the road is going to be even more critical as more and more districts have to deal with time of use billing. I'm sure some of you have that already. And the smart grids that are coming down the line. I know everybody is excited about these smart grids, but the dirty little secret about these smart grids is that if you hook up a dumb building to a smart grid, all you're going to get is a much higher utility bill. That your building has to be as smart or smarter than the grid, and you only use electrons when those electrons are lower cost. And so you can do things like cogeneration or ice, making ice cooling to sort of use energy when it's less expensive and save your district some money. I'm sure all of you have heard about Excel, what it means, and where the money came from. It does qualify for building aid, so it's kind of a building aid upon building aid. And I'm not sure all of you have actually used it in its most effective way. We've had some clients struggle with this, and so I did want to chat about it briefly. It does fund not every kind of capital project, but it can fund capital projects that don't qualify under your energy performance contract, so you be cautious about what you can pay for. We always recommend, using this after you've exhausted some other strategies. The building aid increases the total cost of the project. We're not sure every district has done that, and one of our clients had to go back to SED numerous times to make sure that they're going to approve that. I have a little calculation after this slide. which are just a caution that obviously you need voter approval on it, and there are some limitations on what kind of project can be funded. But one of our clients has still $2.6 million of Excel money available, and with a building aid ratio of 53%, they can get another $1.3 million of aid and construction value. So they can almost do a $4 million capital project with a $2.6 million Excel apportionment. So it's a strategy that you can use. You know, you are borrowing the money because you get that aid back over those time periods, and so you want to explain that to your taxpayers and your communities. But it is a way to get some more dollars out of Albany to help improve your capital facilities. We've been successful as well getting a grant out of New York State DEC, which was interesting. They had a consent decree. They penalized a utility in our area, and $1 million was set aside to for a school district or a municipality in order to help them save some energy. And so they had a competitive application out there where this money would be best spent. This money also qualifies for building aid. So we had actually done some energy modeling. So the district did spend some money showing that we could reduce their fuel in 2 buildings actually over 40%. And those 2 buildings had interruptible gas services, so we probably could have saved even more energy, but this district wanted to maintain the interruptible gas service. So if the utility comes in and you get better rates to have that interruptible service and says, oh, you have to shut down your gas use in January and switch over to your alternative fuel, which in most cases is fuel oil, you have to do that within a 24-hour time period, I believe. So you do want boilers that can burn dual fuel, both natural gas and oil. Those boilers are typically not as efficient as some of the boilers that burn only natural gas or propane. Those boilers can get up to 98% efficiency. They're condensing boilers, and the old non-condensing boilers are limited to about 80-85%. And that has to do with that the condensing boilers allow moisture to condense in the flue and roll back into the boiler, so they don't have to use natural gas or whatever energy to evaporate the moisture and send it up the flue like a standard non-condensing boiler. So the hybrid design was paid for totally with this DEC grant. The cautions are that you have to spend some money to apply, and usually the stronger your application, the more money you've spent on it, and there's no guarantee of funding, certainly. Here's a picture of that dual fuel Buderus boiler, and the smaller high efficiency condensing boiler, which is fully modulating. These boilers are fabulous because they can modulate from 1% to 99%. And so for most of the year, when you're not running your boilers at full throttle, they're very, very efficient, and that's where you get those big cost savings. And we've done some boiler projects under Energy Performance where they've paid for themselves in under 14 or 13 years. So they're pretty quick paybacks from that point of view. Some of our clients have been successful with getting money from FEMA. We had Hurricane Irene recently, and before that another storm that had damaged this baseball field. You do have to have the feds declare it a disaster area. We filed the paperwork with FEMA. SED told us, hey, they'll give us building aid on top of it, and we were able to restore these fields and make some drainage improvements so that this certainly doesn't happen again. FEMA usually conducts informational seminars. I'm sure some of you have heard about it, if not participated in it. It is a challenging process. ASBO had issued a notification on it recently after Irene came last year. But certainly you must have it declared an emergency. There is a long time frame to get funded in some of these programs. You do have to have both federal and state oversight, and that's always interesting. And that FEMA will only pay for the remedial work, and it's based on what they believe the cost estimate should be. So we had to do some negotiating. In certain parts of the state, it's much more expensive than what FEMA believes to do construction work. So that's always a negotiated thing. They will work with you, however, including the State Energy Management Office, or SEMO. And one of the other cautions is that you have to spend that money first, and then they'll reimburse you. But it is a way to get some extra dollars. Here's a berm that was created along a stream to prevent the stream from overflowing and flooding this field, which was restored with a French drain and backstops and things. So it's just another way to get some additional dollars. The next to last way we're going to talk about is leasing, which is a nice strategy. You don't need voter approval on a lease. You can pay for things like bleachers, solar panels, and even temporary classrooms, which put some quotes on the temporary word. Oftentimes these temporary classrooms stay there quite a long time, and recently for one of the BOCES we designed 4 modular classrooms, which we knew they were going to be there much longer than the 5-year lease or the 10-year lease, and those leases can get renewed. And so we built this one as a floorless modular, which was kind of interesting. Typical modular classrooms have a wood floor, a wood roof. They come on a trailer and they get dropped on some piers or foundation. We were looking for a more permanent solution, just in case the classrooms stay there longer, and we wanted to put them on a slab on grade, and found a company that would deliver to us a floorless modular. So the modular classrooms are built with a ceiling, 4 walls, and no floor, and just a steel frame that they drop onto a foundation. And if there's time, I can show you a quick video of how that's done, but that works great for a BOCES that has sometimes quite a lot of difficulty doing capital projects. But just like anything else, leasing is still a construction project. Even if it's not going to SED like a bleacher, you should still have some oversight there, as we chatted about before. It is sometimes more difficult to control the quality of the construction in a leasing agreement, so you really need your consultants to make sure that that the documents are well defined, and your modular company is going to work with the materials and systems that you're specifying. Modular companies typically like to build things in their own manner, so I would encourage, if you're going ahead with a modular project, to reach out to some of the modular companies, see how they like to build things, and then have your consultants use some of their standard specifications. That's where the savings are, and that they build these things every day, and there's some economies of scale. So the more standardized material systems and equipment that goes into your modular project, the greater your savings are going to be, and that's something to try to maximize. This last strategy is something that I've been trying to get SED to allow us to do in a more effective way than we can right now. It's really converting from primary electrical service, or actually from secondary electrical service, to a primary electrical service. And if you're not clear what that is, briefly, the electricity is delivered to most of our buildings at about 13,200 volts on those high voltage lines. And as it comes closer to the building, it gets stepped down to the 120, 240, or 477 volts that gets used in most of our buildings, single or three-phase. And the reason that's done, it's just more efficient to transmit electricity at those higher voltages. There's less losses. If you put your meter on the primary side at the 13,000 volts, the Public Service Commission says that the utility companies have to charge you a lower rate, because if the utility companies install your transformer and all the other stuff, they get to build in the cost of all that in their rate. So they've negotiated with the PSC, and if a district buys the electricity at its primary rate, there's some significant savings there. Many of the electrical services in our area are over 40 years old. We had one district lose 2 services in 2 different buildings within the last 10 years. And one of them happened at an inopportune time. As I told you before, one of them happened over the summer. But to replace an electrical service during the school year is not a fun thing to do. And so to plan your service upgrades is really something we would prefer and recommend to our clients. And this strategy actually allows you to plan that service upgrade and have it pay for itself in under 15 years, depending on the cost of the service, which is related to how far it is from the street over to your building. But we see those costs between $30,000 and $40,000 up to $120,000, depending on how far the building is away. It does qualify for building aid, but some of the challenges there is that you have to get voter approval for it. So it has to be part of a referendum, and if we could have got it as part of an energy performance contract, it would have just taken a board resolution. You do have to lay out the money, so there is that initial cost that will pay for itself in a period of time. You will own the transformer, but they last quite a long time, well beyond the payback period. And if you're doing underground excavation, there's always risks and concerns there. Here's the one electrical service we installed that was done on an emergency basis. In this particular instance, we didn't have the time to convert from secondary to primary, couldn't get the transformers in time, but we ran the feeders and sized it all so that we can do that conversion at a later date and then begin to start saving some of the dollars. In another school, we looked at over a $6,000 savings each year. And this particular building, I think it was under $50,000 to replace the electrical service. So that's faster than a 10-year payback. And so the calculations get a little confusing, but we just took a typical month and said how much kilowatt hours they would use per month and what their demand charge would be per month, and looked at the 2 different rate structures, the summer rate structures and the rest of the year, and came up with these numbers. We've tracked it over the last year or 2 and found it to be pretty accurate, and that district is saving money as we speak. The bidding phase is always an interesting time. They, as you know, in New York State here we have the Wicks law, which requires us to bid out any projects over a certain size to multiple primes. We have obviously prevailing wage rate requirements. When I was Vice President of Government Advocacy at the American Institute of Architects here in New York State, one of our challenges was to get the state to repeal or to reform the Wicks law, which a few years ago we were successful. We did get some Wicks law relief, which in Rockland County, which is where I'm from, and some of the surrounding counties, it really didn't help us. They really grouped Westchester and Long Island together. and gave them an exemption. I think it's the 1.5 million. Anything under that could be done without the multiple primes. New York City had a 3 million exemption, but the rest of the state, instead of a 50,000 exemption, which was there from the 20s, I believe, is now about a $500,000 exemption. So any project under 500,000, you can go to a single contractor. We'd like to have that whole Wick's Law thing tossed out. We believe that saves, and there's studies out there that it saves 20 to 30% in your construction projects. If you have any opportunity to speak with your elected officials, I would encourage them to look at Wick's reform. You'll have to meet all the general municipal law public bidding requirements, and I'm sure you guys know how to do all that, advertising, going with your lowest responsible bid, which is a challenge for us in the public sector. But as I said before, one of the strategies we use to help control costs, the design of alternates. Many projects we have 10 to 20 different alternates, only because, as we said before, we can't really control the bidding environment and the construction costs. And the more alternates we have, the more flexibility we have in putting together a project that comes in under budget and gets us at least the work that we need in a timely fashion. The construction phase, that's really my favorite part. It's when things start happening and things get a bit crazy during that time. We manage that phase very well, and we try to encourage our clients to either bring in a construction manager, clerk of the works, or bring in more site time for their architects or engineers. Because so much happens during construction that we want to try to smooth that process out, whether things get damaged or leaks happen or you find wet insulation like we did this morning. A pre-construction meeting is critical to set some of the ground rules, and those periodic meetings are also critical. Applications for payment are fairly typical. It's where your architect or engineer or construction manager will go out there and certify how much of the work is complete, and then authorize whatever that is. If they're 10% complete, we'll certify that 10% of the contract can be released. There's usually some retainage to that as well as an extra cushion. The payroll certifications get submitted during that time, as well as we always ask for an updated schedule. One of the questions I always hear is, how do we keep a project on time? And it's almost a cliche that so many projects are delayed, especially in public bidding. But really the only way to do that is with liquidated damages, which for anyone who hasn't worked with that before is really sort of like a financial penalty, although legally you're not allowed to call it that, to the contractor for not meeting a particular deadline. On recent projects, we had a financial penalty of $36,000 if they missed the deadline by 1 day. That was what our client had felt was their damage. That's why it's called a liquidated damage. It has to be related to the costs you incur should the project go beyond the projected completion date. So if it wasn't going to be completed by, I believe it was November 15th, then there was a liquidated damage that didn't matter, but at least till December 15th. They almost missed that second month and would have incurred another $36,000 damage, but they got it done just in time for that. But that's really the only way to keep your project on time. For some other retail clients, we've actually had $5,000 a day liquidated damages, and it works. It does increase your construction costs a bit because contractors try to put in a bit of a cushion when they bid, and they know there's a liquidated damage in the contract. But if you need a classroom opened by September, then that's really the way, the only way to guarantee that it'll be there on time. Substantial completion is always a fun time. Everyone has a different definition of what substantial completion is. To contractors, it's when they think they're done, but the legal contracts have some pretty clear definitions. It's when the building is ready to be used for its intended purposes, and means all the life safety elements are in place, all the heating and cooling systems and the emergency exiting systems are all in place. It is determined by the architect or the engineer on the job. It's not determined by the contractor. So that is something that we take very seriously. It does start the warranty period and does turn over the building. We want to make sure a punch list is done at substantial completion. So any damage or any non-working items or nicks or scratches are put on that punch list. And then after substantial completion, really the district is responsible if they move in furniture and things like that and cause some more damage. If it hasn't been identified on the punch list, it's not the contractor's responsibility. So that's something to take very seriously. You'll get your certificate of occupancy from SED once we send up the substantial completion documentation to them. Sometimes they'll even give you a verbal if you're trying to move in time for classes, and the paperwork can follow a few days later. But for the most part, they want to see all that documentation. And the final completion is when that punch list is totally done, and we battle with contractors all the time about, well, they're almost done. They got a few more items on the punch list, and it doesn't matter how much money we withhold at substantial completion. And one of the other reasons we do the punch list is to not only say what items are not done yet, but also to put a value on those items, the cost to complete those items. Should that contractor walk off the job, we want to make sure that our clients have enough money to replace that door or fix those windows or get that lighting or air conditioning or heating system to work properly. So we attach dollar values to all that. And for some clients, we double that and withhold twice the punch list value, and that has to be put in the contract up front. But sometimes that helps getting the punch list items complete in a more timely fashion. Because if any of you have been through a construction project, it's completing that punch list that sometimes gives us all a few headaches. But final completion is when that punch list is ultimately complete. We make our final inspections and sign off on it. And then the last thing we would do is a post-construction inspection, which is really like a warranty review. Before the one-year time period is up after substantial completion, it's a good idea to walk through your buildings to make sure that the building systems are all working. If there is anything that is not functioning or is not working the way it was, we should document that so that it falls under your warranty and can be identified with the appropriate contractor or manufacturer to make sure they rectify the problem. So, you know, some of the cautions, I think we already talked about most of these things, is your scope items are always a concern for a lot of our clients, that clients who want to do certain projects, when they're confronted with what SED will require that they do under an EEB or a building condition survey, it sometimes adds scope to the project, which again increases the cost of a project. And so that's always a balancing act between what items can we afford to do now and what can we afford to do later. As I said, be careful about your building condition surveys. Make sure that anything that's designated a health safety item that has under a 5-year life expectancy gets included in the scope of a project for a particular building. Change orders are always a nasty word. We see the 3 different kinds of change orders. One is for an error or an omission in the documentation. If something is not shown there, then a change order is legitimate for a contractor to ask for. Sometimes there's unforeseen conditions. Either there's rock under the earth, bad soil, or when you open up a wall, you find there's a lot of electrical and plumbing lines that have to be relocated. And then sometimes there's scope changes. An owner may want to do some additional work. We've been successful with SED, interestingly, with two change orders that I think have pushed the limits of what SED will tolerate. One was a roofing project where some vandalism occurred to a roof on a building that really needed to be replaced in its entirety. We only had the money, the insurance money at the time, to replace the part that was vandalized. And but we designed the rest of the roof as an alternate. And we actually started on the first part of the roof, and at that time then the money through the budget process was secured and the voters approved doing the rest of the roof. And we went back to SED with a change order for, I think it was almost $1 million when the initial construction value was about $100,000. So they were a little shocked at a change order that's, you know, 1,000 times the original scope. But they understood why we did it and ultimately approved the change order, which saved our clients quite a lot of time and money if they had to then rebid the project and do it the following year. In another instance, we were able to convince SED that this contractor who had done a fabulous job replacing windows, about $300,000 worth of windows in one elementary school, our client found another $300,000 in the budget, and we hadn't bid out that second phase as an alternate in the early bidding, but we got some prices from the contractor while they were on the job there for doing this second phase, which we did some analysis for SED and showed them that these prices are in fact the same, if not lower, than the phase one prices that were bid out. They trusted our analysis and allowed us to do a change order for almost the full value of that initial contract to get phase two of these windows done, which saved our client quite a lot of time and money. So as difficult at times as SED can be, they are there to help us and to help our districts improve their capital facilities. Substitutions is always something that we find a challenge. I don't think I've been on a job where a contractor hasn't tried to substitute one material or system or piece of equipment for what was originally intended. Most of the time, unfortunately, we believe it's done for a contractor to try to save money and improve their profits. We've heard stories that these windows are unavailable or have long lead times. We've had to actually go directly to manufacturers ourselves to find out that some of those stories are not true. We have some strategies for dealing with that. We put a huge responsibility on contractors for making the documentation clear enough so that we and our clients, the school districts, can determine this is an equivalent substitution. So it is something that is at the same quality and quantity of what was initially specified. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll specify, 3 or 4 different solutions, maybe 3 or 4 different window manufacturers, or 3 or 4 different mechanical systems, at least the manufacturer and the model numbers. That way, we're allowed to say that it has to be one of those, and it can't be something else that perhaps we never heard of or is not as effective a solution for our clients. The budgets are always a challenge. We've had good success over the years controlling our budgets and delivering projects on time and under budget. But that's something that has to be managed well and be analyzed throughout the early from the very beginning of a project to the end. And delays on public work is always an issue. There's when I was VP of Government Advocacy, there's always a move by some contractor associations to outlaw what they call the no damage for delay clause. They have not been successful recently, although who knows, they may be successful down the road, but certainly have your legal counsel put those clauses in there because on public work, so many of them end up in court or in arbitration for construction delays, and it's almost a cliche. We actually had one contractor who my attorney said actually invented, it's called the Mann-Scholl method of delay claims. In New York Public Work, his name has gone down in infamy in terms of the methodology that this one contractor used for delay claims. It's been upheld by the courts, and I'm sure there's webinars out there for contractors showing them how to do it. So it's something just to be cautious of, and make sure that you have people on the team who know about these things and can help, as we said before, smooth the process along and make your construction project a successful one and a smooth one. So that's really all the slides. We got through them all in the time frame. I don't know if I haven't seen any questions come up, but certainly if you have any questions that we can't get to now, we'll be happy to address them either presently if you have anything. And Matt, I don't know if people want to raise their hand or jump right in, or email them to Matt or myself, and we'll be happy to get you the answers. If you, I believe the slides are being made available to everyone in PDF form, and even a recording of the webinar is available if you missed something. But it's really been a pleasure for me to talk about something that I'm passionate about, and I could go all day about construction and architecture and energy-saving methods, but really we're pretty much out of time. Are there any questions out there?
If you have a question, you can go ahead and hit that raise hand button on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll put you right through the mic. We'll give you a minute to go ahead and do that. Okay, no one's raising their hand, so if you have any questions after the fact, go ahead and email me. I'll pass it along to Mike and then get you the answer. Mike, thank you very much. We appreciate you presenting today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and I hope I kept you all awake and gave you some interesting tidbits on how to get your project off the ground and how to keep it running smoothly.
All right, thank you.